Welcome back. 1966 and 1967 were some pretty good years for Samuel R Delany. He won the Nebula for Babel 17 in 1966, and he followed that up with the Einstein Intersection, which also won the Nebula for 1967. I've got two different cover arts that you may just want to take a glimpse at. Really interesting. I love the cover art on these. So two very cool cover arts, but I'm going to hold this one up for the rest of the review. I really do like that one. So look, very, very interesting novel. And where do I even begin? This small book, it's only 159 odd pages, packs a wallop of a punch. And it doesn't do that for all the reasons you probably think. It's not one for the faint-hearted. There's a lot that goes on in this book, but let me begin by doing my normal thing, which is a bit of a plot overview. I'll tell you what I like, what I don't like about it. I'll put these books, these Hugo and Nebula award-winning novels, to a memory test. Some of these I read like 20 odd years ago. So I'll put it to the memory test, make some recommendations, and then we'll go and rank it on our Sci-Fi shed ladder that we've got going on here, that is aiming to rank all the Hugo and Nebula award-winning novels. So this is really a retelling of the Orpheus and Eurydice myth from Greek mythology. It sort of follows that narrative, and it's sort of loosely based on it, where we are introduced as a reader to this guy. Well, guy is not necessarily the right term, because this is a post-transcendent human Earth. So we're not quite sure what's happened. It appears that humans have become extinct. They've left behind their legacy in the form of myth and the music and culture, but humanity is nowhere to be seen. And it looks like this either alien race or mutant people have taken over where humanity left off. And we're introduced to this person, or this alien being, I think they are, in a low lobby. And the low and the la that comes on later in the plot is sort of significant, and I'll talk to that in a little bit more in a moment or two. So we're introduced to this goat herder and this guy called Lolobi, and he's just lost his love interest, Frieza. It's not a lo or a la, and I'll come back to that again. But he's lost his love interest in some very mysterious circumstances, and it appears that she's been killed. So he goes on a quest to avenge Frieza. He goes on this quest to avenge her, which literally follows that Orpheus myth, where he goes literally into the gates of hell, and they're portrayed in this novel as a vast cave system. And when he's in that cave system, he fights a minotaur. He also finds a relic of an old computer system, very much an artificial intelligence sort of computer system that gives him some answers as to what potentially happened to humanity. So he goes through that journey. He meets a person called Kid Death a couple of times through the narrative, and Death is basically Death portrayed. It's this sinister person who appears to have killed Frieza for purposes of his own and reasons of his own, and Lolobi is made it a mission to basically kill this Kid Death. And the novel sort of follows this really hard to follow plotline, to be completely honest with you. And look, that's as much as I can probably say about the plot. You have this Lolobi guy who loses Frieza, his love interest, in some mysterious circumstances, and he goes on this quest through some caves and through, travels with some dragon hunters they were, in order to visit her. And that's where the plot sort of ends. It's a really weird novel in that sense. Like I said, it's only 159 pages. And you've got to ask yourself, what was so important about this novel that it won the Nebula Award for that year? And I think I'm going to try to break that down. Because to be honest, I struggled. Every time I've read this book several times. And I do struggle when reading through it. It's not an easy book to read through it. But as I was finishing this novel this time around for this review, I had a bit of an epiphany as to how one could potentially revisit this novel and maybe take something away that you may not have potentially done so in the past. So maybe I'll start explaining what I liked about this book by Samuel R Delany, The Einstein Intersection. And I think that's really his mastery of the English language. Like, he's no doubt a very proficient writer. And I think what he's done in this novel, he's set out to write a myth, a new modern myth for the ages, right? And so it's sort of strange to read as a novel. It's sort of very disjointed, like Samuel R Delany can be. It's not an easy read. I think you need to focus on it. But I think, I started reading through this novel. When I got to about halfway through, I stopped saying to myself, you're reading a science fiction novel, but you're reading a piece of poetry. And that changed my complete outlook on the novel. I honestly, it transformed the way I was reading the novel. Because I started out reading it like I do any other science fiction novel, expecting to get a bit of a revelation of a future society or alien contact or time travel or something to do with Einstein, right? And I'll talk to the Einstein Intersection and what that actually means. But I don't think you'll get the most enjoyment out of the book if you do it that way. At least I couldn't. I was reading through and I thought, you know what, I've got to look at this differently. There's got to be more to this book than this Lolobi guy just going through and telling this loosely based story of Orpheus and Eurydice. And I started to look at, what are Samuel R. Delany's strengths? What are his strengths? And his strengths is the mastery of language, right, and structure. And I started reading it, like I said, like a poetry, like a piece of poetry. And it transformed the way I looked at the novel. And I did enjoy it because it is disjointed, but I would say it's also very playful and jazzy. It almost has that quality, if you like jazz music, where it's sort of offbeat. Like, it's just something, the best way I can describe it is jazzy, right? It's almost like he's gone on some kind of weird drug trip and he's done this under the influence. But I don't think he could have written that well if he was, right? So, look, take that for what it is. But I did enjoy the lyrical qualities of the novel. I did enjoy the playful writing. I did enjoy reading it as a piece of poetry. I did also really enjoy the structure of these people on this, or people, aliens, whatever they were, that took over from where Earthlings left, in the structure of language. So I mentioned that the main protagonist is this guy called Lolobi. And Lo sort of denotes your sexuality, as in your biological sex. It also determines your rankings within society as well. So you're given a Lo or a La prefix to your name based on your sex and your proficiencies at certain parts of society. And I mentioned that his love interest, Frieza, was just simply referred to as Frieza. And that's because she was a mute, so she couldn't speak. So she didn't qualify to get a La or a Lo if she had been a male. So I thought that was interesting, a really interesting piece in the novel. I thought that was rather interesting for it. The other part that I really enjoyed, I can't say I really enjoyed, I think it was playful, right? Was how he brought the Beatles into the storyline here as well. And he referred to Ringo as one of the Beatles, the quiet one. And he tied that back into the Orpheus myth as well, which I thought that was nicely done as well. So definitely some, golden moments in the novel. But yeah, it's a difficult one to swallow. So some of the things that were a little bit difficult for me to get full enjoyment of the novel was the surreal sort of flavor to this novel, right? It is very disjointed. And I think Samuel R. Delany, Chip, wanted to do just exactly that, right? He wanted to write a book that reads like a myth, that has that mystery sort of mythological sense to it. And I think he's achieved that. He's done that. But reading it as a science fiction novel, for me, it was hard to do, to be honest. It's not that it's difficult to read. Don't get me wrong. It's not like he's using words that escape the layman like myself. It's just the writing style itself. It's very disjointed. It's very surreal. It's almost like I said, he's gone on some kind of acid trip and has written a novel. Right? So it's sort of hard to follow in that sense. So this novel, in many ways, talks to the importance of myths in the humanity of humanity, right? But it also talks to the importance of identity and being different. And I think Samuel R Delany, he's had some struggles in that sense, being different or appeared to be different from the social norm. So I think some of those experiences that he may have had as a young man definitely play into this novel, where Lolobi was different, and he was trying to navigate through life with exactly what that was and what his destiny was and what was his point, right? What was the point of his existence? So he sort of, deals with that. It deals with those concepts of, being different, being outside of the social norm, and dealing with that whichever way you can. So look, it was an interesting novel. Now, some of the things that I didn't like, it's a difficult novel to read. Those surreal themes in the novel, I mean, it does read like a myth, but I think, like I said, if you switch gears and you start thinking about this novel as a piece of literature, which is poetry almost, then I don't think you'll struggle potentially as much as I did at the beginning of the novel, when I flipped that gear in my head to say, look, let's read this differently, right? So I think that there was value in doing that for me. But yeah, overall, the book is a bit disjointed and it's difficult to follow. So putting this book to the memory test then, I read this novel, it must have been early 2000s, I think. It was just shortly after I read Babel 17, I remember getting this book, not this particular copy, this one it was actually, that I first read, was my first copy. So when I first read that, I really couldn't remember much of the novel, except for a couple of things. I do recall it being loosely based on that Orpheus myth, Orpheus rather. And also, interestingly enough, remember the fact that Lolobi played a machete. And what that is he's got this machete basically, that the handle is carved into, it's got some holes in it or something, and he can actually blow into it and use it like he would a flute. And interestingly enough, that I remembered very clearly for some reason. I don't know. I do love music and the musical instruments, so that may contribute to that. So I did find that sort of fascinating, that after all these years, 20 odd years, I still recall the main character Lolobi playing this machete. I just love to see it. I reckon it would have been pretty cool. Which Orpheus did the same, right? Orpheus, I believe, played a lyre, if I remember correctly. So there was sort of those similarities between those two characters. But look, apart from that, apart from the Orpheus myth, and I knew that there was some kind of descent into hell. And honestly, I can't remember the book as much as I do the Orpheus myth as well. So I think the two are sort of blended in my head, which I think was partly what Samuel R Delany aimed to do in this novel, is blend all these mythologies with this futuristic world and show that man is just the importance of myths and how important they are to humanity. And he's, like I said, he's blended music and the Beatles memorabilia into that as well. And it's just this washing machine of all these myths that are just spat out in this, right? And that's why sometimes it's just a bit disjointed and a bit difficult to follow, because there's just so much going on. It's really one of those novels that I would like to wonder, not that I will, mind you, but I think it would be one of those novels that would benefit from a deep study. I reckon you could take something away by really applying yourself and going through all of this and saying, what's this actually meant? Like, what's the meaning of this book? Maybe someone's done that out there. Maybe someone has done a bit of a thesis, a bit of a study on this. I'd love to read it because, I think it's one of those books that requires a little bit more thought and structure for you to fully appreciate it. So who would I recommend this book to then? It's not an easy one. I don't think it'll be on top of my recommendations when it comes to a science fiction novel. It is, I think, for me, more for an English major. I think if you've got a real interest in language and the structure of language, similarly to what I did for Babel 17, I think it'll appeal to the same kind of people, right? Where you're an English professor or major, or you just love the English language and you want to break it down and really understand the power of language, then I think you will enjoy the Einstein Intersection. But for the layman, someone who's just looking for a good, easy, light science fiction reading, I wouldn't recommend this over any of the ones on the Hugo and Nebula award-winning ladder. But it has some appeal. I'm not disappointed that I've reread the novel. So this is, I think, my second or third reading. And it didn't go any easier for me, mind you. I still find it just as weird as I did the very first time I read it. But I still enjoyed it, right? And I think it is still an enjoyable read, and one that I think is worthwhile just to experience it. So there's probably no better way to summarize this novel by using the Einstein Intersection itself as a footnote for that. Because there's a little section in the book that talks to it. But really that Einstein Intersection is really between the logical realism view of Einstein's theory of relativity in comparison or intersecting Gödel's incompleteness theorem or irrationality. And I think that book ultimately delivers, right? It delivers on its namesake. It's got that blend of logic and realism and just incompleteness, irrational thinking. So yeah, interesting novel. I do recommend it. I do say have a go at it, but go in it with eyes wide open and expecting some weird sort of vibey stuff going on in there. Hey, we've got to rank it on our Sci-Fi Shed Ladder, so let's go and do that just now. Welcome back to the Sci-Fi Shed Ladder, take 3, believe it or not. This has been a really difficult one to actually rank on our Hugo and Nebula award-winning novel. And I normally do these first cut. You would have noticed in the past, and they're pretty spontaneous. But I've been stumped with this one, and I should have thought about it a little bit more before I turned the camera on. And the reason that is because I thought it was going to be pretty straightforward. In my mind, I said, I know where this is going to go straight away. But as I sat down and started working my way through it, I realized that, you know what, I actually don't know where this is going to go. But let's go through, do a quick recap, and I'll try to explain where Samuel R Delany's The Einstein Intersection is going to rank on our Hugo and Nebula award-winning ladder. So this is the A side that we've got going on, from order of ascending to descending, and B side ascending to descending, and they're sort of right to left, left to right. So we got June to Red Shirts and Flowers for Algernon down to the 5th season. And initially I thought it's going to be between Babel 17 somewhere, right? It's going to be either ahead of Babel 17 or below Babel 17. And the more I think about it, the more it becomes a difficult question and a difficult ranking, this one. And the reason is, I think it's because it is a difficult novel to really fully comprehend. And the example being that, you know, if I was to point to any one of these novels on the board and someone says, oh, can you give me a quick one-sentence recap of what that novel is about, I can do it without even thinking about it. You know, I can say The Forever War is really, you know, this war setting. It's a war novel really that talks to the similarities between the Vietnam vets, but it's set in a future society. We're talking about time dilation, all that kind of stuff. Way Station, we're talking about this pastoral setting with this guy who has an first alien contact who runs this way station, right? Straight away, bang, here I go. I've only just finished this novel, literally hours ago. And if you're to ask me, what is the Einstein Intersection about? I really start struggling. I struggle to put it in one sentence. And I can summarize it like I tried to do in my review, but it is that kind of novel which makes ranking it also very difficult. So I'm going to start with Babel 17, and part of me says that it's not better than Babel 17. But then I think about it more and I think, but the writing actually is better, in my opinion, than it is in Babel 17. I really like the concept, though, of Babel 17 with that, you know, linguistic relativity. I thought that was really well done. I really liked the concept of language being used as a weapon. I thought that was brilliantly done. A really strong concept. Well, I don't know what the concept of the Einstein Intersection is. It's like, you know, yeah, the importance of myth, I could argue. It's the, you know, the importance of being different, or I guess the struggles of being different and what that looks like. But it's not so strong as it is in Babel 17, but the language and the style of writing, I think I enjoyed for what it was, not as a story. And that's the problem I have. I didn't enjoy it as a story. I enjoyed it as a piece of linguistic craftsmanship or artistry, right? So I'm going to be truthful to how I'm ranking these, and I'm going to go back to the principles, which is how much did I enjoy these novels? Based on the character depth, the depth of character, based on the strengths of the themes that they portray, based on how memorable those novels were for me, and how well they are written, right? So when I put all those things against this book and how much overall I enjoyed it, I did enjoy it more than the fifth season. There's no doubt about that. I didn't enjoy it more Where the Late Sweet Bird Sang. I thought Where the Late Sweet Bird Sang was a really good novel. And the reason it's not sort of scaling so well there is because the memory test for me, it just failed the memory test really badly. I just couldn't recall that book, and it was one of the most recent novels I'd read on the list. But it really failed with the memory test, and I didn't think the concept was that strong either with those clones. But the Einstein Intersection, the concept, I struggled with what is the concept. It was memorable in the sense that I remember the Orpheus myth and the flute playing guy, right? But I can't say overall I enjoyed it more than Where the Late Sweet Bird Sings. Initially I was going to rank it above Babel 17 because I enjoyed the writing style more when looked at as poetry, right? But this is a science fiction sci-fi shed ladder, and that's where Flowers and Why Flowers is sitting on the B-side, because I think it's one of the greatest all-time fiction novels, not necessarily science fiction. So I can't look at this as a piece of poetry or mythology. I've got to look at it as a science fiction novel, and when I base my criteria on it, that's where it's going to sit. Hey, bit of an explanation. I'm hoping that sort of explains the rationale behind some of these decisions and how I come to be, and trying to be true to those principles that I set out when we first started as well. So yeah, look, Samuel R Delany's The Einstein Intersection. I said the same thing about Babel 17. You know, it didn't rank highly, Babel 17, nor has the Einstein Intersection ranked highly. But these, for me, the Hugo and Nebula award-winning novels, are my top 100 novels of all time, right? They pretty much fall in there. All of them have got a very well-earned place on this ladder. So please don't be, disappointed that your favorite novel is not ranking exactly where it should be, because I think these are all wonderful novels, all worthy of the Hugo and Nebula award-winning novel. But that's just me trying to come to terms with how I'm going to rate these things. Hey, wonderful to have you along for the journey as always. I've been Peter. This has been the Sci-Fi Shed. I'll see you next time in the shed.